So for my project, I decided to see if there was an association between gender and number of social media apps. I chose this question because a lot of the time we see in the news that females spend more time on social media than men. The BBC reports that 44% more women spend time on social media than men, so I wanted to see if the number of apps on each gender's phone had an association in a smaller sample. And as you can see, this is my official question, to see if there's an association between gender and number of social media apps. So next I sampled by going to each of my classes, where I work, where I volunteer, and having everybody fill out So I took 100 male, 100 female, just so that it would be an even sample for each. And then sampled until I had 100 male, 100 female. Fortunately, not that many people go to in those classes. So I sampled from where I work and where I volunteer as well. So I did this by having each person fill out a little form that requested them to answer what gender they consider themselves, and have them count the number of apps they do have on their phone. And I also had them, personally for my data, I use the intervals of 0 to 2 apps, 3 to 5, 6 to 9, and then 10 or more. So I organized that later. I also gave them some examples of what would be considered a social media app. So these are only 12 of what could be many. But what I consider it is a way for someone or a group of people or whoever to communicate and be connected to the rest of the world in some kind of way. Right here is just what a filled out form would look like. So for myself, I just did female, and then I have 3 apps on my phone that I consider social media. So that's what I did. And at the end of each class, I would stand at the door, have them fold their slips so I didn't see, and then they would hand me their slips as they left the classroom. So this next part's going to move pretty quickly. This is how I organized my data. And I started by putting everything into a Google Sheets document so that I could calculate averages and all sorts of other numbers. So you can see here, this is all the data I collected. and I put it into a frequency table. So I counted up male versus 0 to 2 apps and put that in, male versus 3 to 5, etc. And then the same for the females. So and then I calculated the totals for each. So it should equal 100 for the male and 100 for the female. And then I calculated the column totals as well, because when calculating the chi-square, it's important to have the column totals. So this next part is going to be about putting the data into a chi-square table. So there's going to be observed values, expected values, and a contribution to the chi-square. So those observed values that you're going to see are going to be the ones that I collected. So the ones that are in the frequency table right here. The expected values will be counted by multiplying the column total. So for instance, the column total for 16 would be 36 times the row total, which is 100, and then dividing that by 200. So it would be 3,600 divided by 200. That would give us our expected value of 18 for the data value of 16. You can see here we keep going with that, so 39.5 would be found by doing the column total for 3 to 5 apps times the row total for the males. So I believe that was 39 times 100, and then you would divide that by 200. And that continues for each one. The next thing we're going to be doing is finding the contribution to chi-square. Now that's important because it'll tell us the significance level at the end. So to find the contribution, you would do the observed value minus the expected value, square that, what you get for that, and then divide that squared value by the expected value once again. So I split it up male and female almost, so that'd be easier to calculate. And it looks like they were similar numbers for each one. Since I collected an equal sample, it makes sense. And I'm going to continue doing some of those final calculations. But the final one I just did here was to find the x squared, which is the final significance value, so you add up all of the contributions to chi-square. Finally, you find the degrees of freedom, because that'll tell us whether our x squared value is significant. So to find the degrees of freedom, we do row total minus 1 times column total minus 1. And for that, I think we got 5 as our degrees of freedom. So on that table that you saw back there, it'll tell us whether or not our x squared value is below the significance level. If it's below, the data are significant. So here, what I'm going to be showing is the hypotheses. So basically, in order to prove something for this kind of problem, we need to have 2 hypotheses. The first one is the null hypothesis. So for me, that would be there is no association between gender and number of social media apps, and that would make the variables also independent. Then the alternative hypothesis, which is H of A, would be there is an association between gender and number of social media apps, which would make the variables dependent. And after this, after doing all of my calculations, I found that the x squared value we found of 1.46 is not significant for the significance level we chose, which was 0.05. So our critical value was 9.48, 1.46 is obviously less than 9.48, which means that our data is statistically significant. And at the end of the problem, we have to make a conclusion. So the conclusion for our question would be the data are statistically significant. We reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternate hypothesis. The number of social media apps is associated with gender because 1.46 is less than our significance level critical value of 9.48, making our variables dependent as well. This last part here, I'm just going to be explaining or showing or rating what the purpose of chi-square is, basically just to show if your data is fit to a normal model or to show an association. So in our case, it showed an association because the variables turned out to be dependent. And the final part here is just showing what the equations are that I spoke about earlier when I was doing those calculations. So it's just written down just to see what they look like, see what they mean, and that's about it.